Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. And yes, that's right, folks. We're back. We're back with the Truth Attack. Okay, I got a bit I want to get into today, so let's just get right into this. We are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the broadcast network operating and the shows coming. So if you enjoy the information, the lectures, the topics, the discussions, the hosts and the guests on the other shows on the network, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to the libertyworksradionetwork.com website and get signed up as a subscribing member, even if it's as little as $10, $20 a month. We do need your support to keep the network operating and the broadcast coming. And if you want to get fully informed on my favorite topic on the show, which of course is the maladministration of the federal income tax by the IRS, the DOJ, the lower district courts, and the lower circuit courts, well, then you want to find your way over to taxfreedom.com. Start reading and get educated, because the system is about to collapse. The writing's on the wall. The Supreme Court's already done it. It's just a matter of time before the rest of you find out and realize what I've been talking about for 30 years, which is the constitutional fraud known as the income tax that allegedly, according to the courts and the IRS, taxes your labor and fruits of labor directly and without limitation, which of course is a constitutional fraud. That's the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. A heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax is specifically what it reads. And graduated taxation is not found in the Constitution because that's class legislation that divides the people and doesn't treat them uniformly under the law. It allows for class legislation that writes different laws for the different classes of person, which inevitably results in the class warfare we now see playing out in the violence of our city streets. And it all arises out of the classes, which are essentially defined in law by the income tax, Section 1, tax imposed, creating the different tax brackets with the different rates of tax for the different classes of persons that allegedly are all affected by this direct application of the income tax. The whole thing's been a fraud for 75 years. A complete and total constitutional fraud that they got away with under the victory tax in World War II and have been perpetrating ever since under a fraudulent system of what's supposed to be voluntary withholding. But as soon as you try to legally claim exempt from the withholding, because of course there's no tax legally due when you get paid, because there's no tax legally due to be paid until next year on April 15th. And no one can force you to pay or service a debt or a tax before it's legally due, because the 13th Amendment prohibits involuntary servitude. And if there's no tax due, forcing you to service the future obligation before it's due would be imposing the prohibited condition of involuntary servitude. And that's what we actually have, is a system of involuntary servitude by voluntary allowance, right up until the moment you decide you don't want to volunteer. And then, surprise, you've already been subscripted, and there is no volunteering out. So, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the maladministration of the tax. If you know anyone that needs help answering any IRS correspondence or dealing with the Department of Justice in court, I urge you to send them to irszoom.com, where they can buy the document templates necessary to answer with law any IRS piece of correspondence you have received or any pleading you have received from the Justice Department as a result of either being sued civilly or criminally in the federal district court. And if you're in tax court, I can help you there too. So if you know anyone dealing with the legal issues, either with the IRS or the DOJ, send them over to irszoom.com. Let me help them shut it all down and end this thing once and for all in court. where the district courts and the circuit courts are resisting the obvious clarity and clear nature of the Supreme Court's ruling in Moore, where they hold repeatedly writing income taxes are indirect taxes under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, and are not the unlimited, non-apportioned direct tax on all earnings that the courts have been fraudulently enforcing against the American people through their seditious betrayal of the Constitution, the law, and the American people, their oath to enforce the Constitution, through their reinterpretation of the 16th Amendment as authorizing a direct tax without limitation. Even though the word direct isn't in the amendment, even though there's no enabling enforcement clause to authorize Congress at the constitutional level to write any law to enforce any new taxing power allegedly created by the 16th Amendment, which is what they've been arguing for 75 years, and which the Supreme Court tells us is a complete and total fraud. The word direct isn't there. It's not a direct tax. The enforcement authority required isn't there. There's no enabling enforcement clause. Congress isn't authorized to write law. And thus, what's true is what the Supreme Court has told us since 1913. No new powers are created. No new subjects are created. The only people subject to the income tax after 1913 and the adoption of the 16th Amendment are the same people who were subject to it before the amendment. The corporate person enjoying a taxable privilege, taxable by excise. The licensed person enjoying a taxable privilege of license. And the foreign person enjoying the taxable privilege of being allowed to live and work in America and earn money as a foreign person. It's only the foreign person, the licensed person, and the corporate person who were subject to the taxation of income before the 16th Amendment, and it's only those same parties subject to it afterwards, because there is no new power to tax income. Income is only a function of taxing indirectly by impost, duty, and excise. Impost taxes foreign persons, foreign imports, foreign activity, and in foreign places, not the labor of citizens in the 50 states. Duties tax exported goods, not the labor of the citizens in the 50 states. Excises tax commodities, licenses, and corporations, not the labor of the citizens in the 50 states. If the income tax is an indirect tax under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, as proclaimed repeatedly by the Supreme Court and reaffirmed in Moore just a year ago, then there is no basis for taxing the labor of the American people, because labor isn't part of the impost, duty, or excise taxing powers, unless it's the labor of the foreign person, which is clearly taxed in Section 1441B, which is the statute that served as the model for Section 61 when it was written 5 years after the original income tax legislation in 1913. Section 61 came about 5 years later in 1918 under a 75-year-long Canadian tax treaty. Section 61 does not define domestic sources of earnings like rent, dividends, interest, salaries, wages, compensation, annuities, commissions, tips. None of these things are taxable in the 50 states when earned by citizens. Everything in Section 61 is only taxable to the federal government when earned between 1913 and 1993 under the Canadian tax treaty that expired after 75 years. When a piece of legislation expires, if it's written into law with an expiration date, which admittedly, most legislation does not have an expiration date. It just goes on forever. Thus, we probably still have rules on the book addressing whipping carriages on horses connected to a buggy or a carriage on Sunday before church, and other such nonsense that's 100 years old, no longer has any applicability or real connection to today's reality. But the law's still on the books. It just never gets enforced because nobody rides a horse anymore on Sunday to church. But the law's still there. But when a law is enacted under a piece of legislation that is given a specific expiration date, then all of the statutes created under that piece of legislation with the drop dead date, all of the statutes enacted thereunder also expire when the original legislation expires. So Section 61 was not enacted in 1913 under the original legislation of the Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act of October 3rd, 1913, where, of course, a tariff is one form of an impost, which is one of the three forms of indirect taxation authorized by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, but which, as a tariff, only taxes, as an impost, the activity of foreign persons, just like it says in 1441, 1442, and 1443, defining the parties subject to the collection of the income tax in 1913. All foreign as a tariff. It was never collected from citizens until the victory tax in 1942, which was a 2-year temporary war measure to fund World War II. That expired in 1944, and since then there's been no tax imposed on the labor of the American people. There was no tax before the victory tax, and there's no tax after when it expired. The withholding that occurs at your workplace all occurs as a function of your ignorance of the tax laws and the proper use of the Form W-4 by citizens, which should not be used to claim single and zero or married and however many deductions you take as a married person. It should be filled out as being exempt. No taxes owed. When you let them withhold it from you, you create the presumption of subjectivity to the tax, and it's all downhill from there for them. You're just rolled into the paddy wagon with all the other peons and serfs. And you are robbed. You are robbed under the guise and pretense of taxation, under color of law and color of office. It's all a constitutional fraud. So, Moore, the Supreme Court decision a year ago, straightens it all out. All you need to do is go read Moore and learn the difference between direct and indirect taxation. So, gee, I kind of meant to do a couple of minutes of current events here before the show started. We just rolled into that, and I just chewed up the whole first segment. So, okay, well, let's talk a little bit. You know, they're talking about bringing back the SALT deduction, state and local tax, and raising it from above the 10,000 uniform maximum that they established under the Trump tax law change in January 2018. And I've said all along, getting rid of that was important, and we should not bring it back and raise it above the $10,000, because raising that SALT tax above the $10,000 limit allows the big liberal states like California, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, Connecticut to raise their taxes and fund the liberal welfare state and let their citizens deduct those state taxes from their federal tax. So they pay federal tax on a lower dollar amount than the citizens in the rural states that don't have a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 state and local tax deduction. They only have a $4,000 or $5,000 deduction, maybe even as low as $2,000. So why should those poor rural states, or less wealthy rural states, if not poor, why should they and their people be compelled to fund the welfare state being run by California and New York? We don't support giving billions of dollars to illegal aliens or any of the other infrastructure projects to nowhere that they seem to want to fund. You know, I think I hear the first commercial break coming up. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. Find your way over to the libertyworksradionetwork.com website. Get signed up. Help keep us on the air. Find your way over to taxfreedom.com. Get educated. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. Let's just get right back into this. When we had that commercial interruption, I was talking about how I do not believe that they should raise the SALT deduction to anything higher than the $10,000 they have it set at. That $10,000 is more than most people in the country can claim, and raising it any higher will only be giving relief to and subsidizing the liberal, welfare-oriented governments of the big liberal Democrat blue states. California, Illinois, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Maryland, Colorado now. This is how they're funding the welfare states in those states, is they're keeping the money there and having them pay less federal tax. So the big wealthy states are shirking their fair share and burden of the federal tax and passing it to the poor rural states, which have a smaller SALT deduction and can't keep all that money in the state, and lower their own federal tax rate by deducting the $50,000 in state and local taxes paid in Connecticut or New York or California or Illinois. So no, the SALT's a bad idea. Keep it right at 10,000. Why the hell would you reward those states when eliminating the unlimited SALT deduction had exactly the effect you wanted? It caused almost immediately over the last 5 years since it was implemented in 1918, I guess now it's 6, it caused an almost immediate exodus of hundreds of thousands of people from those high-tax liberal welfare states where they no longer got to deduct it. And when you took away the deduction, they said, to hell with this high tax, I'm going to Texas or Florida or Idaho, somewhere where they don't have high taxes. So the liberal administrations in those states were being sent a very loud message. Change your policy or we're out of here. And the people leaving were the productive businesses, the smart, the intelligent, the moneyed interests that understand tax law and regulatory interference. So they were leaving and going to conservative states, which got more representatives, even as California, New York, and Illinois lost representation in the House. Why would you want to reverse that trend and give them back an unlimited SALT deduction or a $20,000, $30,000 deduction? No, no, no. Make the liberals pay for their own welfare operations. Don't let them pass it to the federal government by raising the state and local tax deduction. It only subsidizes the liberal democratic states' welfare and giveaway operations. And we've seen what they're doing, right? They're prioritizing the giving away of money and resources, not to citizens, but to illegal aliens, who Joe Biden let in to the tune of about 12 million. And now the Democrats want to buy their votes. So why should Trump and the Republicans and the conservatives in the smaller, less wealthy states pay for the Democrats to buy votes from illegal aliens? It's crazy. It's crazy. Trump may have said he wants to raise it, but the Republican Congress should not do it. And Trump can tell the people, I tried, but you need to move to Texas or Florida or Idaho or Montana or Ohio, where they have currently before them a proposal to eliminate the income tax in Ohio, which is going away because, as I've been explaining in past shows, the state income taxes are all hinged on the unconstitutional application of the federal income tax as a direct tax on labor. And as I was explaining in the first segment, there is no authority in the Constitution to tax the labor of the American people. You have been bamboozled, defrauded, and robbed, essentially, of your right to work, your freedom, your earnings, your labor, your fruits of labor, and the money you earn from property that you hold and earn money from by right. Federal government's got no jurisdiction to tax rent. If one person renting a room in their house in the state, they got no jurisdiction for that. They got no jurisdiction over dividends, interest, compensation. There's no jurisdiction over any of this unless you're a foreign person, a licensed person, a corporate person, or in Canada, or one of the possessions of the federal government that are subject to this tax since the Tariff Act in October 3rd, 1913. And we see this limited application of the Tariff Act very clearly reflected, printed in the law of the 1939 Statutes of Large under Section 4, which is one of the exhibits I have over here at taxfreedom.com. If you haven't seen it, you need to go over and read who the special classes of persons are that are subject to the income tax, as published in the law in 1939, 26 years after its adoption in 1913. Citizens aren't there. Now you're telling me 26 years after the tax was adopted, they still didn't have it published in the law in the way it was intended to be applied, imposed, and enforced by Congress in enacting the law? Nonsense. Nonsense. The 1939 law accurately reflects the limitation of an indirect tax by impost, duty, and excise, where income is used to measure the amount of tax owed on the earnings derived from the federally taxable activity subject to the impost, duty, or excise under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Without subjectivity to an impost, duty, or excise, there is nothing to measure as tax owed. Income isn't the object of the tax. It's not the subject of the taxation. It's the yardstick, the mechanism that measures the amount of tax owed on the taxable earnings derived from the federal taxable activities subject to the impost, duty, or excise, where the amount of tax is measured by the amount of profit realized from the privilege enjoyed. So, okay, let's go back and try and do a little bit more of a current events here. I keep getting distracted and rambling on, Rose. Okay, so as I was saying, the salt, no, that just subsidizes liberal operations. Now, India and Pakistan are actually in conflict one another, and it looks like maybe they're going to settle it. But this is something that you can be concerned about. India and Pakistan are both nuclear states whose peoples have historically hated each other for a variety of reasons since Pakistan was taken out of India and put on two different sides of the country. So this is not good. You should be aware that there are tensions there that have resulted in actual military conflict, and the only good thing about this is if it resulted in nuclear exchange, it would, of course, upset everything around the world, but it wouldn't be here. So, and there'd be no threat of it being here because we're not part of this conflict and we've stayed impartial and between the two sides. But it's something you should be aware of. There's tension in that part of the world, and historically that's been a nasty area where problems can arise quickly. Okay, they're also talking about what's this, reopen Alcatraz to hold illegal alien criminals. I don't think that's a good idea either. It'd take like over $1 billion to reopen Alcatraz. Why don't you just spend a couple million, open up a tent city on the edge of some military base or camp and guard it with soldiers and essentially treat the illegal aliens being held here and hold them the same way that the Japanese were unconstitutionally held in internment camps in World War II. The difference, of course, here being the Japanese were citizens and should never have been interred, and the illegal aliens here are not citizens, and the due process they're entitled to isn't clear after they enter the country illegally, or a court has already ruled that they need to be deported. So all this yelling and screaming about due process, it's not the same process as afforded citizens, and rightfully so. Just because they make it over the border doesn't mean they can't be immediately turned around and sent back, which is what should be done. There's no process for crossing the border illegally and getting caught by ICE. You should be turned around immediately. When they say, well, they're seeking protection from danger, well, then go to a port of entry and apply for asylum the right way. You don't cross the border illegally and then claim to be seeking asylum. That's nonsense. So it's a no to the SALT. It's a no to reopen Alcatraz. It's a no to years of due process for illegal aliens. I'll tell you, they want due process? Good. Send them to El Salvador. We'll hold them there. And when their court date comes up, we'll bring them back to America for their court date in 10 years. If they don't want to wait, well, they can be let go from the El Salvador prison if they're not convicted of a crime, and they can go home. And then they can come back for their court date in 10 years. That's what the Democrats wanted us to do, right? Wait 10 years for them to have a hearing, because they have to wait here in the United States, and the court dates are so backed up, it's going to be 10 years. So we'll just have to let them be here for 10 years while they wait for their court date. Baloney. Let them wait in Mexico, or a holding camp, or El Salvador, or in their home country. And then we'll bring them back for the due process hearing if they want it in 10 years. What else is going on? Okay, Roman Catholic Church has a new pope. An American bishop has been appointed the new pope. I didn't catch his name. I don't really follow the religious institutions in their news, because it's not my belief that God is found in the stones of the church. God is found in the hearts and minds of the congregation. The church is a bureaucracy that, in my opinion, usurps the authority of God to meddle in and rule the lives of the common man. But there's a new pope. Anyway, okay. Hey, look at this. This is one more thing. I've been telling you that as Trump is successful in signing trade deals with the countries that have come to negotiate new deals, that the markets will react positively to each new deal and will eventually recover and go past where they were when they all faltered upon Trump's announcement of imposing the tariffs. And we got evidence of just that today. They signed a trade deal with the United Kingdom. The market took off up 250 points. So that trend will continue as deals are signed with Europe, with Japan, with South Korea, with India, with other major partners. The markets will positively react because Britain agreed to lower the tariff rates on American products. And that means more American products will be bought and consumed by the British people, which means there'll be more business in America by American companies sold to foreign nations, starting with the UK. So Trump is resetting the global trade program. He is going to force all of these nations that have been using us and taking a free ride by being allowed to dump their products here, while our products are tariffed at anywhere from 300 to 800% when sold there. And Trump is leveling the playing field. He's going to cut out all those outrageous tariffs imposed by those nations unless they want reciprocally high rates on their goods here in America, which they don't, because we have lots of choices. We don't have to buy anything from one single nation. We can go buy it elsewhere. It's that other nation that needs our market more than we need their product, because we don't have single source. Back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. Let's just get right into it. I got a couple more notes here on current events on the upside. We got oil, which has fallen below $60 a barrel for the first time in 4 years? So that means the price of gasoline and diesel fuel will be coming down. This is something that Trump has succeeded in doing. And as I've explained before, the price of oil is critical to our economy. When it's high, energy is expensive and nobody can afford to do anything except go back and forth to work. When energy is cheap, everybody can be productive, businesses can hire, goods can be delivered, expansion can be undertaken, and more jobs created. Energy is everything in your economy. When energy is cheap, jobs will be created and productivity will occur. When energy is expensive, the opposite will happen and the country will fall into a recession, which is what Joe Biden was creating with his terrible economic policies. And of course, the Fed hasn't been much help either. They raised interest rates way too high. Then they lowered them for Joe Biden to help him with the election and have refused to move them since Trump took office, citing uncertainty, not caring about the fact that you have an economy on the verge of recovery and all we need is lower interest rates to give access to capital back to Main Street to stimulate the boom under the new trade deals that are coming and are already starting to be put in place. But no, Powell over at the Fed isn't lowering interest rates because he's always late to the party with the right action. He raised interest rates way too fast and was late to stop doing it. He didn't begin lowering them soon enough and then stopped when the political administration changed. So, yeah, no, I don't think much of him. He needs to go as soon as his term is up. And of course, as I mentioned, the UK trade deal bumped the market 250 points on the announcement of it. And of course, the Democrats and the liberal mainstream media all jumped on the same bandwagon again, like they do with their voice of uniformity. And all say, oh, the deal with the UK, that's not a big deal. They didn't have really high tariffs. It's just not that big of a deal in terms of trade. And I'm sorry, but it is. Not because it means a lot of money, but because it proves that once again, Donald Trump was right. He can bring these countries to the table and renegotiate better deals. And even if this was not a major trade deal with the UK, it proves he's right. They will come to the table. They will drop their tariffs on American goods if they want to sell their products in America. That gives Donald Trump leverage and the upper hand in negotiations at the table. That's how you conduct a business deal. You know how it's possible? The Democrats don't understand that. They've never done business in their lives. They only use law to force you to fund them. They've never done business in their lives. That's the problem, isn't it? Government doesn't understand business. It only thinks it's the power that everyone has to listen to. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? The government thinks it's the sovereign power. They don't understand anymore. They're not the sovereign power. They're not entitled to sovereign immunity in the courts because they're not the sovereign. In America, we do not have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic that provides for not a system where the majority rules, but a system of representative government. Representative government. We have a House of Representatives in Congress. Who do the Democrats and the courts think the government represents? Mexicans? Tren de Aragua? The businesses? The states? No. The representative government represents the sovereign power, we the people, who kept authority over all areas of our lives and society, not specifically granted to the federal government to write law for under the Constitution. That's why it's so important to get them out of education, energy, agriculture, housing, medicine, healthcare, environmental protection, occupational safety, transportation, commerce, labor. None of these things are in the Constitution for the federal government to write law to control. They are all reserved as issues for the states to legislate for in each state as that state's legislature sees fit for its own people. The government is usurping the authority of the states, reducing the sovereign people to slaves to service the debts of Congress that have displaced the states as the legislative authority in virtually every area of our lives. And it's resulted in exactly the same situation the founding fathers fought a revolution to get rid of. He hath hence sent forth an army of bureaucrats to eat out our substance, to harass and eat out our substance. And that's what the federal government is today. An army of faceless bureaucrats that eat out our substance by the harassment and direct taxation of labor they've fraudulently enforced for 50 years. They're not the sovereign. We, the people, are the first. America is the first nation of kings. What that means is that each man is king within his own castle and property. Each man owns his own property, not the king. It's not on lease as part of the plantation or the feudal estate or the peonage plantation or manor. It's his property. He's the king. He's the sovereign. And the federal government is a limited power authorized only to do what the Constitution lets them as our representative. We're the sovereign. They're the representative. The last 75 years since World War II, they've been playing the role of the ruler, the master on the hill. They're not playing the role of the representative, and they've not been pushing an agenda that represents what the American people want. They, both the Democrat and Republican parties before Trump, have been pushing the global government and agenda and allowing the American people to be the source of funding for the development of that global government around the planet. And that's why we have a $37 trillion worth of debt. Because they've been giving it away to try and build this global government that will result in the American people being saddled with the financial responsibility without enjoying any of the benefits assured them under the Constitution. So, the income tax is the end, or was the end, of American freedom, starting with World War II and the victory tax when it was imposed for the first time as under the emergency excuse of the war. And the American people let them get away with it and have let them get away with it since. But there is no constitutional authority to tax the labor of the American people. This belief that there is a direct, non-apportioned, unlimited tax on the labor of the American people under all of these circuit court decisions by the various circuit courts, with Perkins in the 6th and Collins in the 10th and Broughton and Young in the 8th and Beckraft in the 9th. All of these circuit court decisions have gone the way of Roe v. Wade, and Korematsu, and Chevron, and its regulatory deference, and affirmative action. Moore throws away the direct tax. It's been Roe v. Waded, as it were, or turned into Dred Scott, bad legislation that is known to have been bad and erroneous. And Moore throws it away. You don't believe me? Go read pages 5 through 7 of the opinion. Go ahead, I dare you. And then tell me whether the IRS has not apportioned direct tax that they've been assessing on the basis of gross income, whether you think it's legitimate or not. Go ahead, go read the opinion. I've got it right there on the website, taxfreedom.com. It's the first article up. It's been Roe v. Waded. It's been Korematsu'd. It's been Chevroned. It's dead letter law. It no longer has applicability because the United States Supreme Court made it up to begin with. And now they've thrown away the invention of the liberal court of the 60s. This court has thrown it all away. They threw away regulatory deference under Chevron with Loper-Bright. They threw away Roe v. Wade with Dobbs. They threw away affirmative action. And now they've thrown away the direct, non-apportioned, unlimited direct tax on income based on all sources of gross income, which was a constitutional fraud right from the beginning. Right from the beginning. So, to my mind, it doesn't really matter what the Republicans do with this new tax legislation. The next case that comes to the Supreme Court that's properly argued is going to overturn the entire tax system. The direct tax goes down. The tax on labor goes down. The gross income argued basis goes down. The lack of liability for a direct tax goes down. A statutory liability only for the payment of tax that has been collected from foreigners or employees gets resurrected and can only be enforced against collectors, not workers. And the last domino to fall are the state income taxes, almost every single one of which is hinged on the federal income tax and its sources of earnings as gross income under Section 61, and any alleged requirement to file a federal return. Don't have to file a state return if you don't have to file a federal return. Don't have to file a federal return if you're not liable for any tax. You're not liable for any tax if you don't collect it from a subject party. Your labor isn't taxed if there's no direct tax on income, because labor isn't part of being taxed by impost, duty, or excise unless it's the labor of a foreign person or labor conducted in a foreign place, like a possession or a foreign country under tax treaty, as was the situation with Section 61 right from 1918 when it was implemented and legislated into being as part of the Canadian Tax Treaty, which expired in 1993. Section 61 is dead letter law. It never was domestic law. It was never enacted by Congress with any greater application at law than that provided by the original legislation in 1918, and any such enactment would have been unconstitutional and still is. Because there's no taxation of the labor of the American people by excise. Title 15, Section 17 says the labor of a human being is not a commodity or article of commerce, and that precludes its being subject to any excise. Taxation. Impost is foreign, that can't be labor. Duty is exports, that can't be labor. If labor isn't a commodity, it can't be taxed by excise, because there's no privilege. It's a right to work. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. I urge you to tell everyone and to share the information. Get over to taxfreedom.com and go listen to the videos on the Thomas Freed YouTube channel.